Hi, I'm Brandon Volker, and welcome to Beyond the Bar with Jack and Brandon.
So good afternoon. Today on the Brandon and Jack Show, or Jack and Brandon Show, I'm not sure which it is, we have State Representative Stephanie Dietz, who is also an attorney. So I want you to introduce yourself, but before you do, tell us the jurisdictions that you are a state rep in, because with the latest redistricting, it has gotten very, very confusing. Now, you don't have one of these districts that goes from like Covington to Paducah, but you have picked up some new areas.
Right, so the 65th district has Fort Wright, Park Hills, Crestview Hills, Edgewood, and the core of Covington, the majority of Covington. So 5 cities.
So that is a fairly diverse area that you are a state rep for.
Yes.
And a state rep is 40,000 people, roughly?
44,000.
All right, and that's consistent throughout the whole state?
Yes.
So tell us also, you're a lawyer.
Yep.
You kind of serve a dual role.
Yep. 2 full-time jobs.
How does that work?
Oh, so for the past 2 years it's worked okay. I've managed both. I think being a trained attorney and having some experience helps out when you're in Frankfort, because at least I think about how are we going to actually fulfill the legislation. How's that going to work? How's an attorney going to actually take this and follow it? Or what would the clerks do, or what's our county attorney going to do? So I think I bring that perspective. From a time frame, we're getting ready to go into the short session for the next 26 days to finish that up. So I've worked really hard the past couple of weeks to get my practice in a place where I can leave and work extra on Mondays and extra on Fridays and on the weekends.
So you say short session, and I know those of us who are familiar with it know that there's a long session and a short session. But just sort of for the folks who are watching this, why is there a short session? Why is there a long session? And
so that's a history question. So I think we always had the 60-day session, which was budget session, and we met every other year. And then several years ago, and I believe it was a constitutional amendment to have us come back for a short 30-day session, which is, they say, is for cleanup. We're supposed to come back and we take care of simple issues, maybe reopen the budget if we need to on certain things. But really it's a cleanup session, and it's not supposed to be anything that's significant or any kind of drastic changes.
what is that in practice? What happens?
That was not at my experience, my first session now.
Okay. Because I know as a casual follower, and I am a weirdo, I subscribe to the Courier-Journal and the Herald Leader online because I want Kentucky news, and I think that some of our local news sources does a great job in Northern Kentucky, but for me to get Kentucky news and to find out what's happening in Frankfort, sometimes I feel I have to go to either the Courier-Journal or Herald Leader. And when I'm watching this and I see the legislative updates, it seems like there are dozens and dozens of bills being filed daily.
Yes.
I mean, is there like a certain number? Do you know where we're at in bills that have been filed for this session?
Gosh,
I'm not trying to play stump the chump here. I'm just.
I think
500, 1,000, 5,000.
I don't think we're at 1,000 yet. We may have been close to 300. I should have looked at that beforehand, but no, I mean, there was a flurry on the first 4 days that we were there to file bills. I think there's a gap between, we dealt with House Bill 1, which was to reduce the income tax, so that
was passed, right?
That was passed out of the House. My understanding is the Senate's going to vote on that our first day back, and it'll go to the governor's desk, and everything that we've heard and from the governor's State of the Commonwealth address is he's going to sign that. So I think that'll be the first law that comes out, is to drop our income tax for next year.
To 3.75?
3.5.
3.5.
Yes.
Because we're currently at 3.75.
We met our triggers and we were able to vote on that. But there's a gap between, usually 1 and 15 for priority bills. So I don't know how many of those actually got filed as priority bills from 2 to 15. But yeah, there's a lot of bills. My understanding and what I've heard from the Senate side is they have a gentleman's agreement that each senator, at least in the majority, we're only going to file 5 bills apiece. I was listening to Max Wise talk the other night, and so far that seems true, that the Senate senators have all agreed they would not file more than 5 bills apiece.
So a lot of those bills will never see the floor. So if you could just briefly kind of walk through that process of filing a bill and how it goes from being filed to then ultimately being signed by the governor.
Yeah, so I think, going into my second session, I now understand what the interim is for. The interim is really our time when we're not in session, we still have committee meetings, where you can work on a bill, you can draft a bill, you can have a committee chair hear it. You can hear the criticism, you can hear the support, you can bring in stakeholders, and you can make it better. And then once we're in session, you can file that bill. So we have new legislators. I was one of those 2 years ago, when you come in and you file a bill, and I think maybe the understanding isn't there of finessing it, and that way you don't have to have amendments and committee subs. So you really want to work on that important legislation in the interim. But now we're at a point where we're in session, bills have been filed, and our rules changed this time on the House side. So before, our bills were not automatically sent to a committee. You'd have to go talk to a committee chair, ask them to call your bill. Some would get assigned to the committee on committees, they'd be assigned somewhere else. But now each bill, we've been told, will be assigned to a committee. My understanding is you still have to go to the chair, you need to make an appointment, you need to talk to them about your bill, and you've got to get your bill called. Sometimes
So the chair can just stop it. It can die at the chair.
It can die at the chair. You can talk to leadership, which is, I think, which would lead to another conversation of having a good relationship with leadership. The floor leader, the speaker pro tem, and you can have a meeting with them and explain why your bill's important. Why is it important not to just your district, but to all of the Kentuckians? So really it's trying to get that bill called, and I don't know that people understand how hard that is just to get your bill called to committee. Once it's called to committee, then you need to whip your bill. You need to already talk to your committee members, make sure they understand it, and get ready for any potential questions that they'll have. I would not want to present a bill if I already had whipped it and knew that it was not going to pass. I have a bill that I would like to be called in judiciary, and I'm whipping that bill now, wanting to get support for it, so I know ahead of time, is it going to come out of committee? And I whip it with the Republicans and the Democrats. After you present it in the committee and there's a vote, and then hopefully it comes out of committee, it goes to the floor, it needs to have its readings, and then you are able to take a vote on the floor. As long as it passes on the floor, then it goes over to the Senate. And you do the same thing again. You have to ask the chairs, the committee chairs, to hear your bill.
So the House has to go, you have to go, let's say it goes to Senate Judiciary, you gotta then go, just like you had to go lobby the House Judiciary Chair, you gotta go to the
Yes.
Senate.
So I'm guessing practically most bills that have a chance are going to have to be co-sponsored by a senator and a state rep, or is that not?
I don't know that co-sponsored, but it sure does help to have someone lined up on the other side that's willing to carry your bill.
Gotcha.
Last session I had a bill, and I had worked on with Russell Coleman. It was to make anatomically correct child sex dolls illegal. And it came from a case out of Kenton County. I had worked with Rob Sanders, our Commonwealth attorney, on that. Russell Coleman reached out to me after he won the election. I worked with the Kentucky State Police because we added the AI portion to that bill, and that came from a conversation with KSP. But I brought Chris McDaniel in on the Senate side. So Senator McDaniel carried that then on the Senate side. Because to your point, not only committee, but I got to get it called on the floor. And after that, then it goes to the governor. But those relationships are so important. And right now we're in a place where I'm building new relationships in the Senate because our Senate leadership changed. So our chair of our judiciary changed with Whitney Westerfield retiring. We have a new floor leader on the Senate side. I mean, it was nice when Damon Thayer was there and you could text Damon and say, hey, Damon, my bill hasn't been called. What can you do to help? So those relationships are really important on both sides so that you get that cooperation and just getting your bill called.
So there are bills that, let's say something comes out of committee, almost unanimous, there's still no guarantee. It doesn't automatically guarantee it's going to be heard on the floor.
Correct. Yep, you're
And I've-
constantly begging, lobbying is a better word, but yeah, begging for your bill to be called.
What do we need to do in Northern Kentucky? Because I think we always feel that we are the redheaded stepchildren of the state in Northern Kentucky, right, wrong, or indifferent. I think that in the last 3 or 4 years, last maybe 10 years, we are getting more funding from the state and we are getting more things. But what do we need to do? I mean, if you're out there listening and you're a voter, what are steps that we need to take to make sure that we have a better chance of putting our people or getting people elected that will make it into leadership? Because it seems like leadership is very, very critical in Frankfort.
Oh, a great question. I mean, we're
Because
very,
we don't have anyone really in true leadership right now, do we? I mean, we have some committee chairs.
we have committee chairs, and I would say that Senator McDaniel holds one of the most powerful seats that
Yeah,
you
he's
could
the
have in the
budget
state
chair, right?
the A&R chair on the Senate side. And we've got Kim Mosier that's chair of health services, but I think Chris McDaniel probably holds a really powerful seat. But as far as what we consider leadership in running and being in that inner circle, we don't have anyone from Northern Kentucky right now in that inner circle, not on the Senate side. Damon Thayer has left, he's
Right.
retired, and not on the House side. So
And we have not traditionally held many of those seats
No.
in Northern Kentucky.
No, we haven't. No, we haven't. I think Damon was probably one of our last, and what was he there for, 12?
Right.
So I think
And let's
it's
be honest, Damon was southern Northern Kentucky.
Yeah, that's right, and not up here. I mean, and I agree. Northern Kentucky is all. I've always felt like we just figure it out. We've got 3 really good judge executives.
Right.
It amazed me. There would be bills that would come across annexation. I'll give that as an example. The last
It's a
2
hot button
times.
issue with a lot of our clients.
Yeah, and I would text Judge Knockelman, and our judge executives work so well with their mayors that it was not really an issue for us. So I could take the lead of leadership, but I also knew that there would be a thoughtful approach where across the state that's not true with cities and counties working together. I do think people look at us in Northern Kentucky and we figure it out. Economic development, we work together. We've got Julie Kirkpatrick. We've just got some great people in Northern Kentucky that are doing amazing things. So we're figuring it out.
But-
You hit on a good, I mean, annexation, because I'm like you, because I have a place down in Corbin, I had people call me.
That was sort of the
Right,
the leading edge of the annexation legislation.
I was
down in that
texting
area.
Chris and Damon, and why I'm like, well, it makes my exit wet so I can buy beer quicker. But to your point, up here, we didn't really care because most of them up here, the counties encourage the annexation because, our counties aren't really set up to provide those kind of urban services. They'd rather have more incorporated cities, whereas in the rural parts of the state, there's true like battle between
Yeah, I think
county
there's more
and
of a power
city.
struggle. I don't think we have it up here just
Mhm.
because, I mean, here in Kenton County, and I do a lot of work in Kenton County. I mean, what do we have? 23
Well,
cities?
It's
within
a
the
different
county or
style of
something?
city. So like I represent Falmouth, and it's a very small city, but they do water, sewer, electric. A lot of these cities are the provider of utilities also, whereas in Northern Kentucky, cities and county really just do governmental. I mean, those utilities are generally by SD1, regional utilities. So
And there's a lot of state representatives. They have 5 counties. I have 5 cities. I have 5 mayors I work with. There's a big difference when you're talking about working with the mayor groups. Once a month, Kenton County mayors get together. I feel like we have a really good rapport with our
But
cities and the counties.
Back to my question, how is there any steps we can take as citizens of Northern Kentucky to try to get a seat at the table of leadership? Or is the deck just stacked against us here in Northern Kentucky?
I don't know that the stack is. I don't know that it's against us. I think we've had people that have been interested in other. Like Kim Mosier. I think Kim's very, very good at health services, and that's been her thing. She could easily have maybe run for one of those positions in a leadership role, but I think she's very good at what she does and happy with what she does. So I think we need to, I think the Northern Kentucky caucus needs to work together. And our caucus is very diverse. between Boone, Kenton, and Campbell, and hopefully within that caucus identify people that can help build those relationships with everyone. I mean, you've got to be able to deal with the Democrats, and that's your Louisville Democrats. That's, our Campbell County Democrat. We have one, Matt Lehman, and your hardcore right and your moderates. So I don't think you can be in a leadership role if you're not able to bring all those people together. So as a voter, you want someone that can bring services back to your community and someone that's going to be there to pass good legislation. But on the longer term, I think you have to be looking at where do we want Northern Kentucky to be? If we want Northern Kentucky to be on the forefront and continue the path that we're on with great economic development, we have to think about the people that we're electing, and are those people that are able to bridge those differences with all the different factions within our caucus and the Democrat caucus.
There's the fact that, we do have a lot of factions. Like, to your point, there's a lot of my, conservative friends of mine that love every Friday and Saturday night when to come down to the urban core of Covington to hit wine bar. Whereas if I'm down in Corbin in the evening, if there's a church event, people want to go to church. And I'm not saying we're not religious here, but it's different. But I think we do have more factions in Northern Kentucky. We're probably just more diverse. I'm not just from because there's so much more to do up here.
Right, I agree. I mean, it's my district's very diverse, and I think your Republican in Northern Kentucky is different than your Republican that might be in Eastern Kentucky. We have, I think, our I would say preacher contingency. We have members in our caucus that are.
Are there more preachers or lawyers?
I think more preachers.
Actually. I think it used to be lawyers. I think I remember when I was a clerk down there, it was a lot of lawyers, and now there's less lawyers.
And it doesn't make it. I think at the end of the day, we all believe in the same things. It's how are we going to get there? How do we present ourselves? And I've just explained it to people that my lens is a little bit different. I can go down to Covington and to Mainstrasse and love the diversity that we have down there. I've loved raising my kids in Northern Kentucky with the diversity we have. Not every part of the state has that type of diversity. I think it's been important for my husband and I raising our kids here to have that exposure because it's real life. I think it's made them the people that they are, and I think it's been good for me. I grew up in Woodford County, so I grew up in an area that wasn't very diverse and went to a county school. Since law school, have lived in Northern Kentucky. My husband grew up in Covington, but it's been able to, I think that growing up in Woodford County and then living my adult life in Northern Kentucky has given me the benefit of seeing all the diversity, which has helped me in Frankfort because it's diverse.
You bring up a good point that, I spent 7 years in Lexington, and I went to high school in Louisville and elementary school for a period of time in Louisville. And both Louisville and Lexington are Kentucky cities. And sometimes Northern Kentucky does not always identify as a Kentucky city, right? I mean, things like Derby is big in Kentucky, right? I mean, there's Woodford County is pure Kentucky. And somebody, and this is not an indictment of people who have grown up in the greater Cincinnati area like my daughter, but there's a big difference between Marion County, where my wife, her mother is from, Woodford County, even frankly Lexington and Louisville, than this Northern Kentucky area, because everyone outside of 3 counties thinks this is Cincinnati South. That's the reality.
It is a reality. I can't even remember who it was my first year in Frankfort. He said, "Oh, you're the legislator from Cincinnati."
That's right.
No, from Covington.
But
close across
as we sit here,
river.
we're literally staring at Cincinnati, and so I think, but it's kind of funny because I feel like in Northern Kentucky, Cincinnati really doesn't adopt us, and Kentucky doesn't really adopt us. So I do think we are kind of like the redheaded stepchild. But I think the more, and maybe this is my own political soapbox, but the more diversity we get within Northern Kentucky of people geographically outside of Northern Kentucky, like yourself, maybe can be ways to, Kim Mosier's from Grant County, I believe. It might be ways to assimilate into leadership because there's just a different understanding of respect, right? For the church crowd, or that is certainly deep in the state of Kentucky, or for just some of the traditions or things that are out there. A bill or the, I guess, constitutional amendment, right, that came out of Frankfort as it related to school choice. I think a lot of people in Northern Kentucky were shocked that did not pass. I would have been shocked had it passed, because only in Northern Kentucky, Louisville, and Lexington are there a lot of private schools. The other 117 counties or whatever really don't have private schools. So when that public school system is the largest employer in your county, we're probably not going to vote for that.
Right, and I agree, and I tell people, you drive down Dixie Highway and you start by Notre Dame, Cove Calf, you've got Beechwood, you hit Blessed Sacrament, you keep going, you've got Dixie, you've got St. Henry, you've got Lloyd, you just keep on going, and it's, private school, public school, you have an independent school. When I moved here, Woodford County, you had a couple elementary schools, one middle school, and one high school, and people would ask me, well, are your kids going to go to
2A?
school?
3A, what is Woodford County when you would have been going? 2A school, 1A school?
It was probably bigger than you
I
think.
think so.
Was it?
Yeah.
How many people did you graduate with?
What
How
year?
many people
I thought
did
you
you
asked me what
graduate?
year.
No, how many people did you graduate with?
200?
Yeah, probably 2A, 3A. Because you went to a huge school, Camden County.
I think I graduated like 350 at
I had
Campbell.
about 420, I think. So to circle back, as far as the, I think you used term primary legislation. What was the term you used? You said House Bill 1 is priority legislation.
Priority legislation.
So what would be, give us a sample of some of the priority legislation this House session.
Oh, gosh.
Well, before we get to, it's not just when you file the bill, you get the next, like filing a case in circuit court. They can actually assign the number. We're gonna hold back 1 through 15.
They do hold back for their
Okay.
priority bills.
So if
And the
I'm
rest
Johnny
are-
on the spot, I'm gonna file mine 6 months in advance. I want to be number 1.
Well, you can't file it until we've gavelled in
So they get to control the number.
the numbers.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, so they'll hold back a certain amount. I actually was looking at the Senate bills the other day, and there's a gap on there, and so they've reserved some as well for their priority legislation. I don't know any particular bills that I know that would get the priority numbers. I'm not in that inner circle. I know.
So they haven't been established yet.
No.
House Bill 1.
TJ's got 1, number 2. I think.
Does he have number 2?
Something about gold. The taxes
And
on
currency,
gold or something.
yeah.
I don't know. I just see William Devane all of a sudden saying,
And
"Oh,
the
so
speaker
we're
may
gonna
be a
buy gold."
co-signer on that one.
Yeah, I think that was
So
number.
is it
that
taxation
could
of
be-
gold or not taxation
I
of
think
gold?
it's not
Not
taxing gold.
taxation. I think it's to not tax.
Gold.
So gold is taxed? I don't know.
Well, it
I
could
don't,
be
I don't
capital
trade in
gain.
gold, so I don't.
William Devane tells everybody should buy gold in the commercials, but it's I guess it'd be capital gain. You buy a gold coin for $1 and you sell
Sure.
a gold coin for
So
10.
why wouldn't that be taxed?
I don't know. I'm just telling you the bill I read about.
But
How is that any different than any other commodity?
It's gold. I don't know. That's why William Devane is telling you to buy it on
Okay.
Fox News.
But I think what we're going to be looking at, I looked at some, housing. We heard a lot in the interim.
Yeah, affordable housing is what everybody
Well-
talks about, but it seems like in all my city meetings, that is affordable housing is a very controversial subject.
Well, but to your point, that study I saw the other day, I showed my wife. My wife. Caitlin, Jack knows her. She's a registered nurse, and I think the stat that was most glaring, that it said 68% of registered nurses could not afford to buy a home in Northern Kentucky. The service industry, like restaurant, this was home buy or rent, was less than 1%. And like what Jack's leading to with these cities, I see it. A lot of people, I don't think really realize that. I think sometimes people think it means like if you build apartments, it's going to be government subsidy. It's like 23, 24-year-olds, maybe dad's a teacher, maybe mom's a teacher, that, I look at it from the standpoint of all of us having kids that are growing up, that, I've got a daughter who's an instructional assistant. She's got a boyfriend who I think is, does electric. Between the two of them, let's say at 25, 26, they end up getting married, maybe making 80 to 100K a piece. They can't afford to live in Northern Kentucky. And I think
There's
a
not
lot
enough apartment
our
housing.
generation, our children will not be able to afford to live by us. And I don't think anybody's figuring out how to fix that problem.
Well, and that was the word that I think the ad district came up with. It's income aligned housing, so that we took that stigma away for everybody thinking we mean subsidized housing.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what we mean. We mean income aligned. So I think what their study came back, I think we're short about 6,500 housing units in northern Kentucky, but that's it's your teachers, it's your nurses, it's, you know, I've got many adults, one that's getting ready to graduate, and you know, is he going to be able to, what will he be able to afford? What's out there that they can afford? And just coming off an election and going door to door and seeing what's out there, I was out, it's Covington, but out towards Independence, there's a whole new housing unit. It's got condos, it's got apartments, Tuscany.
We have an attorney in our office that just bought a house there.
And for me, I envision more of that, because there were whole families that lived back there. It might be grandma living in the condo. It might be mom and dad that are my age that have downsized and living in a landominium, and maybe their kids are in a condo. They have a swimming pool, they've got rec rooms, and so there's a community back there. But that's what I envision more of what we need, and it's all different price ranges.
Sure, but
within
the
same
community at large needs to accept that and appreciate that, because I sometimes think, again, on the city side, you will see developments like that being proposed, and a lot of people will show up at those meetings saying, oh no, there's apartments, oh no, there's condos, oh no, you know, they're not all $1 million houses, we only want $1 million houses around us. Well, no, you can't have that. Where, like to your point, where are your children going to live?
Well,
where are your grandchildren going to live?
And here's, I was talking to Aaron Sutherland, who's a good friend of mine, he's on Newport City Commission. Newport released that they're going to build homes for like $200,000, and there's a grant. And so it's like, I think that's a great idea. So again, maybe one's a firefighter, one's a teacher, a police, they can afford. But then I also know friends of mine that believe government stay in my life will not like the fact that they're going to put on deed restrictions that say you have to live there so long. You can't just sell and flip it, because that is the problem. If we try to get this housing and then the just natural growth because of supply and demand ramps up the price, it'll just keep repeating itself. So we almost have to, and again, I know it sounds anti-free market, but we almost have to come up with how do we keep, if we develop that product, how do we keep it to where it's there for future generations that need it? Because I don't see housing costs going down in northern Kentucky.
No, and as a divorce attorney, and coming out of 2008 to where we are now, I hope we never get back to 2008. But what I see in my law practice is these homes that people bought at an interest rate of 2.5%, and they were paying more than what the house was probably really worth. But because the interest rate was at 2.5%. I don't think the houses are going to hold their value. We have artificially inflated values on these homes. So we've kind of pushed that market in that direction, and it makes it really hard for people to sell or refinance, given, if they're getting a divorce, to refinance it at 6.5 or 7, they can't.
No, I mean, the payment goes up, and people always, and we all joke about this, oh, well, I'm just going to, I'll just assume the loan, take it over. There's not a bank in the world that says, fine, you're right. We're going to let husband off, wife, you just sign here. It's all yours now. That's how they make their money. Refinancing.
Yeah.
Well,
although we just had a case and it did happen.
We did. I think there was a military component or something.
And it took a couple of years.
It's like an act of Congress to make it happen.
So what can, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but what can Frankfort do to assist the income-aligned property problem we have in northern Kentucky?
I don't know that there's a government fix to it. I know Susan Witten has filed a bill that would allow for first-time and I think second-chance homeowners to have a savings account or a savings credit. I'll be interested to see where that goes. Some people suggest different zoning, but that goes back to local government. But I don't know if there's anything on the state level that we're able to do. I don't know if part of our job is drawing attention to the need.
Mm-hmm.
And we did that in the interim with the task force, or if there's a real legislative fix. I know I had Tara Nome from the ad district, Katrina Bowman, Sharmily Reddy come down and testify on what our needs were in northern Kentucky. So I don't know, it'll be interesting to see what other bills. I only know about Susan's that's been filed so far.
I think, and the only thing I could, if you did some form of, most commercial development has an industrial revenue bond component. Do you use something like, let's take housing that brings in families.
You've got to
give away the property tax because each one of
Right.
those children attending the schools leads to SEEK funding and all that. I'm not saying it's a lot.
I think
but
Brandon's right that some tweak of the IRB legislation, which right now is geared toward industry, to geared toward residential, could be a potential solution. Because at the end of the day, you're going to have to lower the cost of construction or land development. That's ultimately, I think, what's going to have to happen.
Or government's going to have to participate. If I'm a school district and I'm having trouble, I've said it. I represent Newport schools, and there might be a dynamite student graduating from Moorhead that, let's be honest, you're graduating college, you're going to go get a $40,000 a year teaching, and your parents are like, well, wait a minute. They go up and they're like, wait a minute, they want $2,300 a month in rent. Whereas if you just come back to Rowan County to teach, you can get a $600-700 rent. What is the role of whether it's cities for police and fire, schools, to where what's out there to assist in order to get affordable housing? And maybe you incorporate that in their compensation package. That I know I have a city that used to do down payment assistance for police officers that was forgivable loan if they stayed there. But ironically, then the housing prices still went up so high that it rendered that program almost useless.
So any other thing that might come out of this session that you think will interest people?
Oh, I think we heard a lot about freestanding birth centers over the past 2 years.
Okay, you're going to have to educate me. I don't know what a freestanding birth center
I think
is.
it had to do with certificate of needs, and so there are a lot of home births in Kentucky, so there was a lot of testimony over the past 2 years and in the interim about freestanding birth centers and certificate of need.
So basically, like a clinic that you go have a child at, so you don't have to go to a
Correct.
hospital.
Like with a midwife?
Yeah. And I my understanding, and there's been some articles the past couple of days, but I think during the interim, I think, like St. Elizabeth worked with some of the legislators in Frankfort. I think Jason Nemus out of Louisville has a bill that he's filed that will allow those. And my understanding, I think, is that St. Elizabeth is okay with that verbiage and what they proposed. And from the testimony, and some of our doctors from Northern Kentucky testified last year, there was concern over whether a doctor needed to be present. Does the facility need to be within so many miles of a hospital? I saw that Dr. Oakes, a good friend of mine, testified against freestanding birth centers. And I went down and talked to her after her testimony, and she had just that evening had been on call, and there was a baby that was rushed to the ER after a home delivery and had died. And she was obviously very emotional after her testimony. But she came to it with real facts.
Right.
And I think there's some, obviously as lawyers, there's liability for hospitals. You're bringing the baby to the hospital or the mother to the hospital afterwards. But I think my understanding is they've worked through some of those issues, that they believe that it'll be safe. And that's always just been the goal. We want mom to be safe. We want baby to be safe. I don't think there was anything against, people choosing to have a home birth or using, a freestanding birth center, as long as we can make sure everybody's safe. So I think that could be a big one that comes out. I know there's a lot of people wanting to reform certificate of need. I don't think we're going to see that, but this starts to chip away at some of those small pieces on certificate of need.
Well, I think, and I've heard a lot of presentations on certificate of need, I think there's really only, 3 or 4 that truly say he has what I would call a control over, and I think birth might be one of them. And there's not a lot. There's a whole lot of things that...
Ambulatory, it's complicated. It is. I don't think it's an easy topic. I think you've got to,
beyond the scope of this podcast.
We'll leave it at that. I think it's complicated.
It is complicated. Anything else that's interesting out there or that will impact folks?
No, I've filed a few bills on my own. One has to do with our domestic violence statutes.
Okay, talk about that.
It's to add coercive control to our domestic violence statutes, which is a pattern of behavior. My hope.
What does that mean?
It's a pattern of behavior that the victim experiences, where they try to isolate, diminish you. It could be hiding your car keys. It could be taking your name off a bank account. It takes away your autonomy. Taking away a car. Convincing you that you don't need your job. I mean, these are all things that lead up to isolation. And when you read the studies, when you hear the testimony, this is usually what happens before a physical act of violence happens. But we have victims that can't escape, and they would escape earlier or leave the abuser if our domestic violence statute allowed that. Right now it says that there has to be an act of violence or a threat of violence. Sometimes the violence, it hasn't occurred yet. It could be just laying your weapon, and not a gun. It could be a board that you've used. It could be hitting an animal. It could be using the children against the spouse. But it's a pattern. I presented it in the interim. The suggestions I heard is they wanted some things that were more specific in the statute, so I added those. I've been working with Zero B and other domestic violence groups. And I don't know that it'll go this time. It could be next session. I hope we get it through this time. I hope that it saves lives. I mean, we had that incident not too many months ago where, was it Hardin County, where the victim went in to get her EPO and she and her mother were shot in the parking lot coming out. Kentucky ranks at the very top of domestic violence. So I think that there's still room for us to try to fix some of these problems. So I've got that bill. Would like to have judiciary call that. And then some other bills I've worked with Rob Sanders on. One that actually a couple of newspapers have run stories on has to do with jurors, and it's not even a I wouldn't consider it a big bill. But Rob shared with me a story that he had a former juror call him after a trial for several months, and I think it was a sexual abuse case of a child, and defense didn't stipulate, and I think my understanding is they've had to watch hours of video. And so the juror, was suffering, I would say PTSD, months later, and called Rob. So
it's tough for $12 a day.
It is. And you take people that, we live in this world, so
right.
We hear about trauma, we hear about abuse, and not that, I guess we get used to hearing it and a little desensitized, but for people that don't live in this world and they hear that or see that, so this would just have the judges at the end of the trial make it, they have to share information on how they can get services after the trial. They can post it on a website, they could hand out a pamphlet, but it's to inform the jurors that they could experience, and it's normal, they could experience some level of PTSD, or they may need services afterwards. But you're right, for $12 a day.
That needs to change.
Well, it gets even better. I don't know, Judge Sunny once told me, they don't even give funding to buy waters and stuff for them. So the judges actually go out and basically have to bring in snacks for their jurors.
And my understanding is in Jefferson County, parking actually costs more than what they're getting paid. I hope that's something that we see.
Seems like you could
is
just
fixed.
Increase filing fees $10 and pay jurors a whole.
Well, there's all kinds of components of that filing fee in the first place.
I know, but most people, whether the filing, I don't even know what a filing.
We fund a law library.
I don't even know what the funding fee is.
Which the law library, everybody's got a phone. I mean, it's.
Well, it's funny because my new job this year, I was appointed chair of the budget sub for judiciary, public safety, and correction. So I'm digging into that and looking at the filing fees, and one of the big, which is a 2-year project, looking at guardian ad litems, and went back and reread the study that was done in 2018. I think it was done in 2016. I think it was released in 2018. But, how they're paid, who manages the guardian ad litems, what's the training. So that's a bigger project, and I've spent since I found out I was chair, I've met with Chief Justice Lambert, I've met with DPA, just trying to get the information right now and looking at what are our options on how to kind of streamline that process and make sure that we have guardian ad litems that are being paid what they should be paid. In other parts of the state, in the more rural areas where they're traveling or trials last a whole lot longer. But it's a project, it's a budget issue. So we'll see, next year what that looks like, but that's a big one that I want to focus on.
Cool. Anything else you want to share today?
I don't think so.
No? You want to talk to me about your law practice?
I'm still practicing. Funny,
Good.
our bar director told me the other day that somebody said that I wasn't practicing. I am still
You're actively
practicing.
still good.
You sent me an email a week or
And
so.
you know what? We don't, as lawyers, I don't think we ever see each other as competitors because it takes lawyers to create legal work,
Yeah.
right? I mean, if there was just one lawyer in town,
Right.
they'd starve.
Right. So no, having session is challenging. It's doable. I'm grateful for my colleagues and the judges because, I was just on motion docket last week, 2 different judges, and both said, oh, she'll need a Monday. Oh, she's going to need something after March. I mean, so they're aware. They did that. I saw they did that for Steve Doan as well on motion docket. So I'm not getting special treatment, but I appreciate that because it's hard, and I think they realize that we're still working.
Right.
I book myself silly on Mondays and then Friday afternoons, and usually the weekends while we're in session. But no, I'm still practicing, and would love to get to a place after we've passed our legislation on collaborative law that I'm doing all collaborative and all mediation, I hope, in the next couple of years.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it. And thank you for your service to the community because I think as little as folks get paid to go down to Frankfort, I mean, I think it's awesome people that are willing to take their time to do that
Well,
because it's so necessary.
Thanks for having me today.
Thanks for coming.